Please tell me that you guys have attended some of the sessions this week on CAD and BIM and individual topics and things. You have, yes? Oh, awesome, good. Because we almost wish we could have done this session early in the week, so that, because we're going to give you today kind of an overview of all the different kinds of technology that we offer within Esri to integrate with Autodesk products. And it would have been nice to have done that first, because we're going to have to cover what was covered in 1 hour in all these different sessions, all in 1 hour. So it's going to be kind of an overview. It's going to be, I like to think of it like a tasting menu. Fair enough? So when Don and I actually, oh, by the way, I should introduce us.
Yes, you probably should.
I probably should. You know, do you guys know who Don is? Yeah, a few of you do, okay. Don Keeney is the product manager for pretty much all of AEC. What does that mean? He's covering all of the integration with Autodesk, as well as some of the other technologies that touch on that world of architectural engineering construction. Do you want to introduce me?
Yeah, I'm going to introduce
there we go.
You since you introduced me. So this is Karen Hodge. She's my carpool partner. And she is also the...
That's really my only claim to fame.
The architect and lead developer of CAD and BIM across the ArcGIS platform. She is the one that's architecting these solutions and works with a team of developers to provide that to us. To make it happen. Which also means if something that doesn't work the way you like, you can certainly blame him. All right. So definitely, you know, we've spent a lot of our career at Esri working on this field of integration. When we first got here at Esri, which was, we must have been only 10 because it had to have been 20 years ago, and you know. But when we first started at Esri, one of the things that we were challenged with came from some of, well, people like you, because some of you were babies at that time, but people like you who were asking us this question: how do I get people to stop using Autodesk stuff and use GIS instead? Okay, that baffled us a little bit, because in our mind, that was really the wrong question. We really shouldn't be trying to say, let's use this product line or that product line. What you really want to do instead is use the right tool for the job. Let's be serious. Autodesk's design tools are awesome. You're not going to do that kind of work in GIS. But similarly, Esri's technologies to working with geospatial data, can I say that we're pretty much unparalleled? I mean, really, I mean, we do a pretty good job at that. So instead of asking the question of which products should you be using, instead of trying to stay within, as you might call it, one product stack, let's just agree, shall we, that the idea is to use the right tool for the right job. There's another piece of this that I wanted to say was, I spend my career working on creating software, and I think that work is pretty important. And Don would probably agree that I think my work is pretty important. In fact, it has taken me a few years to figure out that, you know what, it's not all about me, and it's not all about the fact that it's the software. Because what's really important isn't the software or the technology you use, it's the work you're trying to do with it. So I think where we've evolved is the point where what we're trying to achieve in Autodesk Esri integration is just getting out of your way and letting you get the job done, providing you a way to make the software work so that you're using the right software at the right time with the right amount of data. So in this session, what we're really hoping to do is give you kind of a broader understanding, not really a high-level picture, because we're definitely going to talk a bit about the technology. Sure. But we're going to be working with Autodesk files, AutoCAD files, Revit files, and how you might want to work with that. We're going to talk more about what it means to work with Civil 3D and Revit within the world of GIS. We are going to be focusing primarily on the Esri technologies that do this. Know that there's also a whole bunch of technologies that come from Autodesk that work with Esri content as well. And I think Don will touch on it a little bit, but we're primarily going to be focusing on our Esri technologies here. These two images are some popular ways to think about about integration between Esri and Autodesk.
my tree is, a lot of people are trying to find a way to create this like two trees that grow together and you have one way to deal with your information. One universal app that does it all. We don't have to worry about licensing. You know what? That's a really bad idea. That's not what we want to do here. In fact, when we look at that tree, sometimes it looks a little evil, doesn't it, when it's like that, all twisty and dark. Because what ends up happening is that you end up with software that doesn't do anything particularly well. So one, it's really hard to do, and I'm not worried about doing hard things. But the other is, it isn't necessarily going to serve you to get your work done. You still want to be able to use the right tool for the right job. The other popular, do I dare call it a myth, that I want to dispel a bit, is this idea of that there's one universal source of truth. How many of you thought, gosh, I really wish I could have one universal source of truth? Yeah, I mean, it's actually common. I've been talking to people down at the exhibit hall quite a bit. But when you say that, and phrases that I hear is, data at the center, which I've heard Autodesk use, I've heard us use. The problem with data at the center is what data? What information is at the center? Now, most of you guys are mainly how many of you guys think of yourself as GIS managers, or your primary role is GIS? Awesome. How many of you also have a responsibility of CAD management? Wow. A lot. Awesome. What a good mix. And my sessions so far this week, they've been primarily GIS-centric. It's nice. CAD people, welcome. And I should also bring in, do you think of yourself as primarily BIM and not CAD, but BIM? Couple. Yeah, and that's actually pretty common too, because while BIM is an incredibly big force, we still have a lot where we're focusing more on the idea of CAD, and usually it's a CAD BIM, right? So when we talk about like data at the center, what data? Who owns that data? Who's responsible for that data? What's the right data to use for the right thing? So think about for a minute a fire hydrant. What's the best way to represent a fire hydrant, you GIS folks? If you had to have all the fire hydrants in a city, what would you represent it as? Point feature class. Makes absolute perfect sense. If you were trying to design a fire hydrant, would that be the right representation? Absolutely not, right? So sometimes a fire hydrant should be a point. Sometimes you're going to want it to be a 3D integrated mesh. Do you want your entire city's 3D integrated meshes of each individual fire hydrant that's been done with a point cloud and figured out with exactly whatever flaw? Do you want that in your maps? Well, you know what? Maybe you do, but maybe you don't. So when you say data at the center, you have to be really careful what you're really asking for. Do you really want one universal source of truth? Or do you want to make it more like, I want the right data at the right time in the format that's optimized for the tools that I'm trying to use? So when you're working in AutoCAD, what's the best format to use? A DWG. When you're working in Revit, what's the best format you want? You want an RVT file. Why? It makes perfect sense. When you're working in GIS, what do you want it to be? A geodatabase, usually. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't times when you're going to want to use these formats without doing any kind of data conversion. And that's good, and that's fine. But you in this room have to realize that there's a price for that. You're not using the data in the optimized form. Now, I'm a data nerd, I admit it, so I'm going to wax poetic about how this is a data integration. But what I really like to think of is more like this. I love these pictures. This is some pictures of a garden in Singapore where you have these beautiful bridges connecting these structures. So the way I like to think about integration with Esri and Autodesk is that the data flows in a beautiful way so that you can get it the way you want it when you need it. So that it isn't getting in the way of you solving problems. You're actually able to do your work without a lot of thought. Now that does put some responsibility back on you guys in the sense that you have to know what tools are out there. And you have to resist the urge to just say, I have a hammer, I'm going to use it because that's what I've got and everything looks like a nail. You have to learn a little bit about what these different tools can do. Maybe Don and I can help you a little bit with that today. Okay.
So one of the things that we wanted to do is talk to you a little bit about, what can you do with integration? And to do that, we want to talk a little bit more about the philosophy and the strategies that we are trying to accomplish when we talk about interoperability in a general sense. So At Esri, we know that we're working with people like Karen mentioned with files that have been optimized for the different design disciplines that you all work with. And so we always want to be able to use that file information directly. So we know that there are going to be these file-based workflows where we want to be able to understand what's the content of that design information and use it in our maps and in geoprocessing and as content.
Yeah, and not worry so much about what it is, but just being able to consume it.
And then we also want to be able to share our GIS information in the native formats of those files as well. So we have these ideas of opening up and using different file formats and also exporting information to those file formats. Another key strategy that we are implementing is this idea of a plugin, right? So within the design tools themselves, we want to be able to generate GIS-ready content. And we can talk a little bit more about that as we go along. And so that we can organize design information that is easily or readily understood by desktop users. So taking sometimes unstructured data and creating structured data, or adding geospatial context, things like georeferencing information or coordinate system information in those files.
Location.
Location information.
Yeah, huge, big difference, yeah.
And likewise, when sharing that type of information, having a way that the plugin can make use of more of the information that comes out of those drawings out of GIS. Another idea about the plugin is that we know any GIS information we can share out to the enterprise. ArcGIS is a great collaboration tool. It's a great way to share information to a lot of different users in a lot of different computing environments. Well, we want to make those design softwares a client of that same system. So plugins allow us to access the information and pull it into our design environments where we need it, to give context to that design effort. Oftentimes, the design constraints that we work in, soils and the topography, wetlands, flood information, are all useful information in the design process and really are our design constraints. And where is that information generally found? It's found and managed by people in the GIS. We want to be able to access that information, but we also want to contribute. We want to be able to edit. So there are processes that we perform as designers in CAD or in BIM that we would like to be propagated or back into the GIS. So we're making changes to infrastructure, and we're also maintaining a record of that infrastructure a lot of times in BIM or in a base map or in GIS. And so we want that two-way conversation to be happening. And how does that happen? That happens through web services, for example. So the same web services that you're using for our Collector for ArcGIS or Survey 123, or that you're viewing in a web map or a story map or an ArcGIS Pro or an ArcMap, these are the same web services that we want to be able to consume in these design apps through a plugin. As we move forward, kind of a higher level conversation that we want to start to begin is this idea of not just moving simple features back and forth, or simple entities back and forth, or simple objects in a BIM model back and forth. We want to start talking about how we can improve the workflows of designing and building and maintaining and operating at a higher level, so that we have tools in GIS, we have databases, and we have asset management constructs, things like the utility network or parcel fabric or indoors or urban, that are maintaining a higher level of GIS. And we also want on the design side to be communicating directly with the higher level construction and design tools like Civil 3D or the whole BIM process with tools like Revit.
Yeah, Civil 3D has a concept of a parcel, and there's parcels in GIS. What is the right?
So there are different views of that information. So
right.
Like Karen was mentioning an example of a fire hydrant, it's the pipes and the tubes and the caps and things. On a Revit side, maybe modeling something like that. So there has to be, it's not necessarily a one-to-one correspondence between these things. It's not, the data structures and the data models for an asset view of a water system or an electric utility is different, slightly different, when you're designing and constructing it. But there is reuse of a construction documentation that can be lifted out of an as-built drawing and used to update and maintain something like a utility network, and vice versa. That utility network view that has all of that content already in it and you want to extend it, we want to look at how that information could be expressed appropriately in a design tool. And it's not going to be a one-to-one correspondence, but we want to be able to, basically jumpstart that process so we can start to create these workflows that have more of these things to be connected. So one of the patterns that we also want to continue, we can use CAD as an example. ArcGIS Desktop has been reading CAD files for decades, right? And we have the ability to just simply open up a CAD drawing as if it was GIS content. And that way, we can use our entire toolbox on that. We can add it to a map. We can use it in geoprocessing. The process of converting it really has already happened when we loaded it, right? So we can do things to save it, like copy features, and just add it to it or append to an existing geodatabase. There are certain things that we may need to add to CAD data. CAD data can be a rather unstructured data format, right? A DWG file or a DGN file. Maybe just a bunch of random vectors that are symbolized in different ways. The position globally of that can be ambiguous or not even understood or was never even attempted to be placed into the drawing. So there are things like georeferencing or coordinate systems that sometimes we may need to add, and there are tools in ArcGIS to help us add that information if that's not already inside those drawings. So the philosophy or the strategy that we use for reading other formats is when we open up a CAD drawing, for example, in ArcGIS Desktop, we immediately see it as GIS content. So for us GIS people, we open up a CAD drawing and it opens up as essentially a geodatabase. It's a folder of GIS layers. And for unstructured CAD data, we just collect them in their like geometries, feature layer of points. Another one for all the polylines in the drawing, another one for all the polygons in the drawing, the annotation, and also 3D objects. From there, you can then start to repurpose that data. Either just use it as it is and add it to your map, or then you can start building from it. So in ArcGIS Pro, I can add that information to the map as layers. I may want to use it in geoprocessing. I might want to just say, I want to take this CAD drawing in memory and then save it to a geodatabase or append to an existing geodatabase. I have, if it doesn't have coordinate system, I can define one for it. If it's not located in the right position, there are tools in there to move it into the right position with our georeferencing tools. When we do read this CAD data, we will create a virtual table of all the attributes, or in this case, the CAD properties, things like layer, color, line style. If there are blocks with attributes, we'll collect those together. And we'll essentially pretend that it's GIS data from the very beginning.
Yeah, exactly.
Even with this unstructured CAD data.
So with CAD data, it is, it's hard to call it unstructured. It definitely has some structure. It's structured differently than we expected in GIS. So I think what we do in Pro, and that's also in ArcMap, by the way, is you're able to consume these CAD drawings and just use them as is. There are some limits of them. They're not editable right there. You're not going to use Pro as an editor of your CAD content, but you can continue to just leave the CAD drawings in place, in which case, going back to the idea of data at center, where's the data? It's all in the CAD drawing, and that's fine. But there's times when that's not quite the right thing, and you may need to migrate that data. That's okay, that's cool too, and the answer for that is a lot of the geoprocessing functionality that can move data from place to place and can do some really cool things, like clean up the CAD data as it's being migrated. So also, we have the ability to consume directly in Pro Revit information. Now, Revit's very different than CAD. So while we're taking kind of the same approach that we can take these Revit files and just read them as content for your map, in the Revit case, it's incredibly structured data. We have, each wall, each doorknob, each nurse call device is one single thing that has a rich set of attribution. So the way we approach that in ArcGIS is we read these files and mirror that in our data structures. So you'll see things like you actually have things like the casework, the ceilings, the columns. And as you interact with these, we're reading these as true 3D objects so that you can can work through and look at the different spaces and do things like search across the, and find, in this case, we're looking at the different places where women's restrooms are, which sometimes is a really important thing to know, you know, is being able to highlight these things. I talked earlier about bridges. When we talk about this, and we're going to try to do this as we go through this discussion, we'll try to point out where these missing bridges is. You want to know where we're going with our development in these integrations? Look for where the bridges are broken, and that's probably the direction we're going. So there's things about this. We really highly focused on the 3D aspects of Revit, which is not a bad thing for us to do, but one of the things that's missing is that you could actually have floor plans, 2D floor plans in your Revit model, and we're not getting those right now. Wouldn't it be cool if we could? Wouldn't that be awesome for like things like integrating with ArcGIS Indoors? Guess what we're probably going to be focusing on? Yeah? We also aren't getting like the materials, the textures, the colors straight out of the Revit file. Okay, that's just obviously something we haven't done yet. There's also not really easy ways to take this data. Now you can use geoprocessing on the data the same way you could with CAD, right? You can use copy features to move things. I think Don's even going to show you maybe some really cool tools that you could do with 3D objects in general in ArcGIS. And oh man, location. You think location is a challenge in the world of CAD. It's really a challenge with Revit. Revit data generally doesn't have a lot of geopositioning information. I'll tell you right now, it's very, very possible to include geopositioning in the Revit model. It is very, very possible. And I think I even know of someone who wrote an entire blog post on how to do it in a way that when it hits the world of GIS, your buildings will be correctly located. The thing is most people aren't doing it. We used to have that same problem in CAD. We don't anymore, because CAD users now do indeed create data in real-world coordinate systems. Sometimes it's a little challenge of knowing where that is, but they are, you don't know what coordinate system it is, but they actually are. So yeah, someone up front is going, yeah, no, not in my experience. They're still, yeah. No, not the architects. You're absolutely right. The architects don't do it. So one of the things we're going to have to do over the next iterations of software is make it useful for the architects to put geopositioning. Right now, seriously, they don't care. You know, they don't need to. But if we can make it valuable for them, how could we make it valuable for them? What if we could provide site content for part of the architectural design? Where is the site content stored? There we go. So these are kind of the directions you'll be seeing us head, is how can we make GIS valuable to an architect, to a landscape designer, that makes it useful, but still honoring the idea of using the right tool at the right time.
Yeah, and so in that, Karen was really talking about two different strategies, right? One is reading the file directly in desktop and reading it better. And she also kind of alluded to the fact that wouldn't it be useful to have a plug-in to Revit that helped me position my drawing according to a map, and that would store that information about global positioning inside the Revit model, or help me prepare a Revit model that was easily understood by a tool like ArcGIS Indoors.
And whether that be something that comes from Autodesk or from Esri, this idea of making it more useful.
Right, right. And so, you know, she pointed out some of the things like floor plans. Wouldn't it be great to just lift those 2D floor plans or 2.5D floor plans out of a Revit model, dealing with colors? The topic of IFC is another type of file format, right, that is really prominent in the BIM world. And so that's another one of the things in the topic of BIM that we want to address, being able to read that kind of information in the same way.
IFC being kind of an exchange format for
IFC Industry Foundation classes is a kind of a national standard for BIM handoffs. Where was I going with that? It's kind of
like a DXF.
It's kind of like the super DXF of BIM.
Yeah, but again, it's one of those things where IFCs can be, IFC in many ways has a broader definition than what you would see in Revit. Revit is, of course, specialized for the tool Revit. IFC is a more generic way to do it.
More for
but much more used by many different applications.
And I just wanted to remind everyone that we already do support IFC.
Oh, we do, absolutely.
Through the data interoperability extension. So a lot of the examples you may be seeing in my slides may have originated from IFC data. What we're talking about is that direct read capability, right? So the idea of having a Revit model that, unlike an unstructured CAD file, is highly structured, like Karen mentioned. So we can make a one-to-one correspondence to the categories of a Revit model, or similarly the categories within an IFC file.
Yeah, the walls go in one feature class, the roofs go in another feature class.
Walls, windows, doors, and those can be added directly to a scene or a map, right, as a discrete set of objects that all have common attributes. So everything we've been talking about so far, and you really didn't touch on building scene layers. Did you want to talk about that a little bit? Sure. So one of the things that another method of sharing or collaborating information is being able to take really complex information, such as an entire building, instead of dealing with it as a series of individual 3D object layers, being able to understand it as a single building. So when I search for this content online, I can take the whole building or a whole campus and add it to my map, but then still be able to drill down to the individual parts of my building.
Because there's times when you want to do things like, I want to find all the science building or all the science labs in my campus. Where are those things? Being able to drill across.
Right, and so the idea we've created at Esri a number of different cached streamable formats for 3D data. So there's a place to put this information. So we have this idea of 3D objects, which are great for cityscapes, right? We can put millions of textured buildings in a data set and then just stream through them on our phones. What we'd like to do is we'd like to take that same idea for BIM and say, well, I have 1 million buildings, but I have 1 million things in 1 million buildings. And so we can basically encapsulate all that complexity into a single layer, and we can treat a building as a single layer, but still be able to drill down to the walls, windows, and doors.
Okay, can I just say that's just a really scary thought? There's going to be a lot of carpool conversations about how you take a building that could have 100,000 features in it, and now you have 100,000 buildings. How are you going to represent that? And
I said 1 million, so there you go.
Okay. That's true. You did even more, and then you'd be able to navigate that in your phone, right?
So in GIS, I could say pretty confidently that GIS is 3D, right? And as soon as I say that, people originally, I think in GIS, were thinking about extruding polygons for election maps and things like that. But our customers, all of you out there, it's 3D, great, let's stick the whole building in there. And so we are having to deal with this huge influx of complexity from CAD and BIM. And then we are inventing new ways to manage it. And so we may have to continue to invent new things.
Yeah, we're going to have to continue to invent new things, which means we're going to have fun.
Yes.
It's going to be some good things coming out of all of this. So what we've been talking about so far has been very ArcGIS desktop-centric, kind of. We're talking about ways that we can consume. So there's also ways, so we're consuming different kinds of Autodesk things to be able to consume CAD or consume Revit, which is all good. Except now we want to be able to, I have to think of it as there's 4 foundational elements of data integration. One is the ability to do that, to consume stuff. The other is the ability to create. That's being able to take our maps and generate something that can be used in the world of CAD. We have this great site content. How are we going to hand that off to our design brethren so that they're able to use that information for improving their designs, which then can come back into our world as additional site content. So that create, consume, and then this idea of a truly integrated functionality that's combined with the idea of how do we share the information and how do we discover? From AutoCAD, from Revit, how can you discover what kind of site content that you could add? And how do we share it in a way that works for them? So I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that at this point. And we're going to start with the idea that you can create CAD content, AutoCAD drawings. Also MicroStation, by the way, for those of you. Anybody here MicroStation people? Yeah, a couple of you? Okay, sure. I mean, this session is primarily about our Autodesk integration, but yes, this also works for MicroStation. Is that we are able to, from our maps, we are able to create AutoCAD drawings. And we use this with the tool, the geoprocessing tool export to CAD. I gotta tell you, I get a little nerdy and get kind of excited about this tool because it's one of the favorite things that we've done. Because of this simple thing. It will be as simple as you want it to be. It'll just do what you want it to do. Or not. It can get, well, yeah, not that it won't do what you want it to do, but that it can be incredibly complex and do some really rich things. So let me talk about what the default behavior is. What you start with, if you have a map, you can take one or more feature layers, put it into the tool, and it'll create a CAD drawing for you. What it'll do is each feature layer will go to an individual CAD layer so that it follows a CAD standard. Now, you want to be more customized about it? I don't want it to go to that layer. I want the streets and the highways and the bike paths all to go to a CAD layer called transportation. You can do that with the Export to CAD tool. You can tell it to go to a specific layer. What about symbolization? So CAD, I feel pretty strongly about this one. CAD symbolization is different than map symbolization. Is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? Depends who you are. You know, it's yes, right? It's both. It depends. So typically CAD symbology is the way CAD symbology is for a reason. So I like to think that when you generate CAD content, you should be using CAD symbology. And so what we can do is, Don talked about blocks. You guys know what blocks are in AutoCAD. This is it's kind of like what we would call a marker symbol, but it also has the ability to embed attributes that act kind of like what we would call labels. And so one of the other things you can do with export to CAD is when you're exporting a point feature class, you can say, please use this block in the CAD drawing. And then if any of my fields happen to also match the block attribute, it'll just populate the block attributes. So the CAD user ends up with a drawing that looks like a CAD drawing should and behaves the way a CAD drawing should. So this is how we can, so it can be really cool or it can just be plain simple. We'll just push a button and it works. And obviously this can be part of an automated workflow. So you can do some really, okay, this is one of the weirder things you can do, but Don and I were messing with it, and it's not a bad approach. You could take your Revit model, and remember, when we do things and we read that Revit model in Pro, we're getting all that rich attribution that came from the Revit model. And you can use that as input to export to CAD to create a DWG from it. Why would you do that? Why wouldn't you just use the Autodesk technology? Well, a lot of it has to do with some things that interesting things we do about attribution. That's one of the things that makes GIS cool is that we've got geometry with attributes. So what happens to those attributes when you create a CAD drawing from them? Well, CAD historically doesn't have a lot to do with attributes, but what we've been able to do is figure out a way to bring that back to you in this export to CAD tool, which is what I mean. It's a very quiet little tool. It just does what it does, but it does way more than you think. Go for it. Click.
Okay. So early on in the presentation, I was talking about one of the strategies when working with files is being able to generate GIS content in a way that's easy for CAD, BIM people to understand, right? And so how many people have used the export to CAD tool?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Right.
It's cool, isn't it?
Right. How many people understand that whenever you've done that for the last decade or so, you've been creating attribute-rich ArcGIS feature classes within the DWG? All the attributes are there, right?
Yeah.
And if you were to open that...
Those of you that can't see, pretty much 2 people raise their hand.
If you were to open that drawing right up in Pro again, you'd see a CAD drawing that had all of this information in it, and all those attributes would be there. Well,
your road names, your parcel IDs would all be there.
Why do we do that? Well, if you have the tool ArcGIS for AutoCAD, all of that data would just pop out to all the people that you shared it with. They'd have all that, all the pipe diameters, they'd have all the ownership for the parcels, they'd have all that information that you've already given them with the tool ArcGIS for AutoCAD. What else do they get? Every time you export data to a CAD drawing using export to CAD, you're getting a coordinate system. Right? So if I have a tool like export to CAD, I can just start adding maps because I know where I am and they'll all project on the fly. If I share this CAD drawing with some other desktop GIS person, it's already been geo-referenced. So the work that I did in GIS to get it in the right position and share it with a CAD user, it's already there. We like to say sometimes it's better in the shapefile. If you are interoperating between ArcGIS and AutoCAD, and you're not using ArcGIS for AutoCAD, and you're using something like a shapefile that doesn't even support curves or annotation, you're missing it, right? The
Well,
DWG
3D.
file is a better container
Yeah.
for sharing information between ArcGIS and AutoCAD users. So using the same data that Karen used when she just did a quick export, I can take any GIS information that I have and use the export to CAD tool, and it will generate an AutoCAD drawing. And that AutoCAD drawing will be georeferenced, and if I look at it with ArcGIS for AutoCAD, all that attribute information is in that drawing and has been, like I said, for over a decade.
Has it really been over a decade?
I think it has been.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I like to think of it kind of, it's like CAD, but better.
Yeah. So the tool, ArcGIS for AutoCAD, it fits into one of those categories of a plugin, right? It's Esri's plugin to AutoCAD. And it allows me to, add maps as context to my drawings, right? I could reach out, discover content, soils and imagery and my water system, and pull both map service information, image service information, feature service information into the AutoCAD. It becomes simple AutoCAD entities with all that rich attribution. I can edit it. I can save it back.
Let me say that one again. I just want to bring that one up. So what that's letting you do, right, is now you've got AutoCAD as an editor of your ArcGIS content.
Right. And I can do that two ways. I can edit features that were shared to me in the drawing when using export to CAD, but I can also use ArcGIS for AutoCAD as a web client to the ArcGIS system, right? So I can read a feature service, I can work with that content using my AutoCAD tools, and then synchronize the changes back. Just like the same feature services that I'm using in ArcGIS Desktop or that I'm using in ArcGIS Collector for ArcGIS or Survey 123, I can have field crews going out and verifying and adding information, and I see all that content directly here in AutoCAD. It can be pushing the dials in my operations dashboard. It's all part of that same collaboration sharing.
How does that handle coordinate system transformation? Like typically you're publishing web services, you generally do it in Web Mercator, so you can use all the basic
Right.
apps.
So the question was, how do I handle coordinate systems? Well, I mentioned before that we've added the concept of coordinate systems to the DWG, so the tools like the ArcGIS for AutoCAD will just project that information on the fly. And so just like ArcGIS Desktop, as long as your data set has defined that coordinate system, the Esri tools will project on the fly all of that information.
So you can publish your services in Web Mercator, which you're right, that's typically how they end up. It doesn't have to, by the way. You don't have to publish them on Web Mercator, but they often do. But in ArcGIS for AutoCAD, once you've assigned it that this is a state plane or a UTM, it'll project those services on the fly when it comes down so you can continue to work with it.
So just a kind of a sneak preview of the up-and-coming version of ArcGIS for AutoCAD, the 400 release. Some new tools for those people who have been using ArcGIS for AutoCAD. This new version has a nice way for us to browse to coordinate system information. So we have this filtering or search content or searching tool. So if I have some favorites, I can just quickly access those. If I know that I'm in North Carolina and I'm using US feet, I can quickly go through the 6,000 different options and get to the one that I'm looking for. Another difference is the idea of we've implemented a project area to help pre-filter content for things like feature services, so we don't get 60 million parcels, and we just can focus on the project area that we're looking at. But the biggest new change is the ability to discover content. So we have the ability to connect to ArcGIS Online and get direct access to the Living Atlas, the content that you're looking for, and put it in your face, but also being able to search. We have this idea now that with your named user login, you can get subscription content, so even better data for things like wetlands or other information that's curated in Esri's Living Atlas, or premium content even. So being able to access both your free content as well as higher level content. The same tools support a number of different feature layers. I can do, or a number of different layer types, things like map layers, image layers, and feature layers. I also have access to my portal. So if I want to add my portal, I can log in and get access to information curated in my portal, including hosted services, either online or in enterprise. So here's an example of pulling in vector points, the survey control from NGS and being able to snap to that content. So both background maps, full maps with all of that attribution, as well as pulling in vector feature content. When I'm in ArcGIS for AutoCAD and I pull in a feature layer, what do I get? I get simple AutoCAD entities that the entire AutoCAD toolbox works on. The only thing special about them is we keep track of what layer they're on. So if I add something to that layer, I'm adding it to the geodatabase. If I delete something from that layer, when I synchronize, I will be deleting it from the GIS database. So ArcGIS for AutoCAD.
ArcGIS for AutoCAD, there's some things about it that, that I really like. One of the things is it's the perfect example, well, maybe not the perfect example, but a good example of letting you do the right thing with the right content at the right time. So when you add in a feature layer, like Don said, what does it create? It creates AutoCAD entities. Why does it create AutoCAD entities? You know what? That's the right data to use in AutoCAD. That's the way to do it. They're not some special kind of thing. They're AutoCAD entities. And what can you do with those things? You can snap to them, you can work with them, and it's fine. It also supports this idea of how people would work in AutoCAD. How do you add new features? Well, you just draw stuff on the right layer. Well, that's what you would do in AutoCAD anyway. So basically, it's the software is there just to support the actions you want to do, and you don't have to bend over backward to learn how to use some new technology in order to do it. Get out of the way. The CAD user doesn't need to understand so much about how GIS works. Just do your stuff and it'll all just work. Anyway, that's kind of, and also this idea that this is a way that we can provide things like all the rich attribution model into the AutoCAD drawing, and they have access to it. If they don't want to see it, that's fine. If they don't need it, that's fine. You're still getting all the geometry and you're getting them as CAD entities. So from GIS, we can give site content to the designer in a way that works for them. Then guess what we end up with those CAD drawings? Better content, because it's now geopositioned, it's all organized a different way, so that when it comes back into the world of GIS, it's a little easier for us to work with too. So anyway, that's one of the things I really like about the way ArcGIS for AutoCAD works. So what you've seen, I hope, is how these things act like bridges, right? We've got ways that we can bridge within Pro, an ArcMap to be able to consume CAD content. We can create CAD content. And then we have tools like ArcGIS for AutoCAD, which are some sort of a hybrid of both, right? And also help you figure out how does the CAD user discover what content? Well, ArcGIS for AutoCAD gives them that window, if you will, into ArcGIS Online or your portal or your data. It's a way to discover it. So there's those foundations. Where are we going with ArcGIS and Esri integration? So when you think about what you've seen, look for the missing bridges, what I was saying earlier. We talked earlier about, we've mentioned a lot about Civil 3D at the beginning. Did you see any functionality that was really working with Civil 3D in what we were showing you? No, there's a reason for that. So ArcGIS for AutoCAD and the ability to read it. Civil 3D, by the way, creates DWG files. Okay, so DWG files are just DWG files. Do we read DWG files in ArcGIS? Absolutely. Does ArcGIS for AutoCAD as a plugin work inside of Civil 3D? Absolutely. What it doesn't know how to recognize, though, are these special Civil 3D objects. So there's Civil 3D and objects. There's objects in Civil 3D that represent parcels. There's objects in Civil 3D that represent alignments. Neither Pro nor ArcGIS for AutoCAD recognizes those right now. Guess what we're going to be working on in the near future? It doesn't take a rocket. Some of you guys probably are rocket scientists, but the idea is that you can tell where we're going to be going with that kind of thing. When you think about Revit, what did you see us do? We're very easily able to read Revit content. I say very easily, but nonetheless, it was quite a bit of work, but we're able to read Revit content. How do you create a Revit model from your GIS data? Do you want to? And maybe not, but you might want to put some information, some site content into a Revit model that might represent existing infrastructure. I could see that, couldn't you? So how are we going to do that? How do we help geoposition? How do we guess where we're going to be going in the future? Right? We're going to be improving that technology the way it works with Revit more and more. What else? What else do you want to see? Anybody feel like shouting out? Yeah, okay. That's because we've nailed it, right?
No. Well, I can add some things to that.
I think Don has a few ideas.
Okay.
Oh. I think that was,
You went backwards.
I went backwards instead of forwards. You got it?
Okay. Oh, there we go. So when we talk about, what are the next steps for Civil 3D, in ArcGIS Pro, we can take a look at the existing patterns, right, that we do for reading files. And so a CAD file, I have called it unstructured, but the same CAD file that's been created in Civil 3D actually is quite structured, very structured. So those AEC entities like alignments and survey points and corridors and those types of things are very well defined inside of a Civil 3D drawing. And so we'll be making the same type of automatic types of assumptions about that information to put it into the appropriate GIS constructs.
You can often I think about Civil 3D as truly a BIM kind of civil BIM content. BIM. Sure.
Yeah. And so when we start to talk again about all the different patterns, there's another pattern that's interesting to us. Karen talked about discovering content, right, in your tool to the appropriate or other types of data. So another one of the things that we're looking at is there are other types of content management systems other than ArcGIS Online, right? Things like BIM 360. BIM 360 is an Autodesk content management system, and we're talking about this topic here, right? So wouldn't it be great if there was a way to be in a desktop ArcGIS and discover that content that we need to pull into GIS? And so that's another thing that we're looking at, is how to connect these other content systems with ArcGIS so that I can browse to the appropriate Revit model or the current CAD file that I need to work with and pull that into ArcGIS Desktop.
Well, yeah, and actually, in some ways, I think of it as, if you want to think about data at the center at all, I mean, ArcGIS Online is a place to put that. Is I want to be able to put my CAD content, my Revit content in ArcGIS Online and be able to use them as true CAD content, CAD drawings or Revit models. Similarly, I want to be able to reach into BIM 360 or A360 and find these content. How do we make it so this searching and discovery of the different kinds of information is easier?
Yeah. And you may have seen, if some of you attended some of my other sessions, we also talked about this idea that CAD sourced or RIP or Revit sourced or BIM sourced information that is served out in a web scene, for example, could be a great geospatial index to other business systems.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Right? So if I have a building scene of a campus and I have that GIS view and I can zoom around it in 3D, I can also create a link to my asset management system. Because we retain a lot of all those attributes from Revit, I could also perhaps link back to the original content in BIM 360. And so in my presentations, I showed some examples of that where it's a simple web-to-web link between this water valve and the original design documentation in BIM 360 for the specifications for that water valve,
yeah, sure.
in which Revit model was it, and it was signed by who, and that idea of linking the source content back to its origin is another use case, or linking it out to yet another business system like an asset management system or other workflow management systems. So kind of in review, just that overarching strategy. The title of this session was, what can you do? And we've really shown you what we are doing to help you do those things. And I think that if you better understand our philosophies, you can see which bridges you want to cross and which bridges are open, right? And so we have this idea that we will continue to work with file-based workflows to include more formats like IFC in the near future and be able to fill out the idea of exporting GIS data in those useful native formats. Like Karen mentioned, wouldn't it be great if I had some GIS information in my Revit model that was the site map, right? Similar to what you might do with Civil 3D drawings in Revit now. The idea that with the use of plugins and repeating that pattern of plugins to different applications, we can start generating more rich GIS-ready content or repurposing construction documentation and as-built data so that we don't have to redraft
So
things.
just helping that whole design process.
So Karen mentioned early on, Autodesk is working through their own series of connectors to ArcGIS. And so I'd encourage you to visit the folks over in the Autodesk booth or attend some of the sessions that are focused on those. Things like the InfraWorks connector to ArcGIS,
Sure.
right? So being able to pull in GIS content in that pre-designed software to give the base map and to populate scenes in InfraWorks, and that's a tool from Autodesk. They've also come out with a connector for Map 3D that does a similar type of thing. And they're also working on a connector that they've been talking about here to Civil 3D. And one of the things that Karen mentioned that ArcGIS for AutoCAD doesn't do now, even though ArcGIS for AutoCAD works inside of the AutoCAD and Civil 3D, their connector is going to make a higher level connection to some of those Civil 3D objects, right? So the similar way that they're matching up GIS content to InfraWorks objects, they'll be making similar mappings to Civil 3D objects, and that should be pretty exciting. I actually haven't seen it yet, so I'm excited to see what they've built out there. And so I would encourage you to visit them on that. Karen talked about other potential plugins like Revit. And if there are other design softwares that you think that we should really focus on, I want to hear it. And so what does that allow us to do? It allows us to participate in the enterprise as another client, reading and writing web services. And then with that forward-looking goal to create some more of these higher-level bridge connections between...
Yeah, I think of it as enabling these solutions to happen.
Yeah.
You know, we can't anticipate everything you want to do with it because each organization is unique.
Yeah.
But we want to support the idea that you're going to be using Civil 3D sometimes and utility networks the next day
Right.
on the same information.
So elevating that conversation just between points, lines, and polygons to higher level walls, windows, doors, alignments, roadways, and
Parcel fabrics, all those kinds of things.
parcels, land
Urban.
base,
Yeah.
urban planning. You know, so we want to really start to stitch together our own technologies and then see how the Autodesk stack matches up to that, and because that's where you guys live, and so that's
Yeah, and we
where
really
we're
just want to
headed.
create the tools that support the workflows you're trying to do.
Most of these have already happened. But these were some of them that I hope some of the other sessions that I hope you were able to attend.
I hope you were able to attend some of these. However, I think you can find recordings of some of these as well. So if you did miss them, you may want to take a look at the titles to see. There's also down in the exhibition hall, there's two places you can look for us. One is the spatial data management section of the exhibition hall. There's a whole bunch of people that have expertise in both BIM and CAD. And most of my development team is down there and can talk more about it. We're going to take some questions here in a bit.
Yeah, the Autodesk booth is another place.
Autodesk booth is
and then
another
the 3D
place.
island. Take
And
a
the
look at the
3D,
people working
yeah.
on the scene layers there.
So a lot of
with
different
that,
things.
I guess we can conclude and take some questions,
Yeah.
if there are any.
So the export to CAD with the attributes.
Yes. So the question is if you use export to CAD, the attribution is being embedded into that CAD drawing. Can you read that with AutoCAD Map? There is a format that AutoCAD Map 3D uses to store attribution. It's different. So you can use ArcGIS for AutoCAD plugin in Map 3D to read those attributes.
But you also could use the new connector for Map 3D.
Yes, to also do the same
go
thing.
through services and connect to a service directly would be another optional way to go.
What about also software, their plugin that sits on top of AutoCAD that's sort of similar to
Right.
3D?
So there's a question, what about Carlson software? What about other business partners that are working? Well, there are a number of business partners that are working at different levels of integration that are similar. Carlson creates what we call MSC drawings, these attribute-rich drawings for their field collection. I'm not aware that they've made a direct connection to services yet. There's another company out of Germany called Grabert that has a product that's DWG-based that's Aries Map, which is very similar to ArcGIS for AutoCAD. Safe Software, the makers of FME and the Data Interoperability Extension, they support the reading and writing of what we call the MSC format, these ArcGIS-ready drawings. So those are some
Yeah,
of the other
the
business partners.
specification that we use for storing the attribute information in the drawing is open. So people that are integrating or writing software can write to it without using any of our technology. We're not doing anything particularly fancy. We're just leveraging some information that's already available in Autodesk's drawing format. We're just exposing it.
Did you say
Okay.
I'm sorry, when was the ArcGIS for AutoCAD to be released?
The question was, when is the new version of ArcGIS for AutoCAD going to be released? It's going to be the fall. I maybe lean on Karen for the exact date.
If I can get home and finish the code.
Yeah.
We're planning on a fall release for ArcGIS for AutoCAD, the version that you're seeing here, which is 400. There is a version that's available right now, which is ArcGIS for AutoCAD, and it's the 370. I don't think we have the download link here. But if you
just Google
it, you'll find it. And it does everything you saw. It does feature service editing now. The only thing it doesn't have is that ability to access the information on ArcGIS Online and Portal, which is a pretty important piece.
You mentioned that you've been exporting the CAD data with the attributes that are available in CAD for the last decade. Is that data with attributes available without the extension?
So the question is, we've been exporting, when we export data to a DWG file, we've been storing all that attribute-rich CAD data in there. Is there other ways to get at it other than the plugin? And what Karen just mentioned was that that's an open format using AutoCAD automation tools you could dig into it, but there are no predefined Autodesk interfaces to access it. So other people wrote their own tools to read and write that content using just AutoLisp or the other API.
You can use AutoLisp or .NET APIs to access that information.
But the plugin is free, so it's easier to read it that way. I didn't hear.
I'm sorry, what was it?
I'm just wondering if that attribute data is available as AutoCAD properties.
As AutoCAD properties, no. It is stored. They don't have a UI that accesses it, so there's no way for you to see it unless you're either writing a script or writing a .NET plugin or using ours.
Yeah, so for data nerds, it's AutoCAD data nerds. The schema is stored in the named object dictionary, and all the information is in the X records of the
extension dictionary.
Extension dictionary of the entity.
Yeah, right.
Right.
It's different.
Right, and that was similar to the question over here about
that's
Map
different.
3D and Civil 3D. Is that their attribute information is stored in a different format in a custom object? Rick.
Yes, I was just going to ask, you guys started to work with the Bricks at all? BricsCAD and all?
BricsCAD.
BricsCAD.
Right. So I would say that there are a number of, the question is, are we working with BricsCAD or even potentially other DWG-based
Aries Map being one of them, right?
Yeah, Aries Map I mentioned from Graybert is one that does. We get approached by these other companies from time to time. BricsCAD is one of them that we've been in conversation with. It just takes a commitment on their part to say, hey, we want to do it. We flew out to Germany and met with the people at Graybert, and 6 months later they had built their plugin.
So yeah, if anybody's got their own kind of CAD app that's based on DWG that wants to do it, we'll be glad to help and show them how. It's open. We're fine with that.
I want to go here.
If I load a map and I save it in a drawing, have I changed the geodatabase, or do I still need to make sure I'm syncing when I save it?
Long-term text.
So yeah, so your question is simple, and I'll repeat it and make sure I get the question right. If you add a map into your AutoCAD drawing, and then I change it in the AutoCAD drawing, you save the drawing and you don't, you actually, so there's like 6 different things. So when you add a map into a drawing, you're actually adding something that's an image and you can't actually edit and interact with it. If you're adding a feature layer into your drawing, yes, you can interact with it. One of the things you can do, which is really cool, you can add this feature layer into your drawing, make some changes to it, save your drawing, take it home, work on it some more when you don't have an internet connection, come in the next day to your office where you do have an internet. Why you don't have an internet connection at home, I don't know, but nonetheless, you don't have any access to your server. You come back in the office the next day, do a few more edits, and then when you're ready, you can synchronize it up to the server. All the changes you've made throughout that time have been saved and persisted in the drawing, but then when you press synchronize, it'll be saved back to the server. Yeah? Pretty cool?
Yeah. So it is by nature a long transaction or a disconnected editing type of
Experience.
scenario. It's multi-user. Well, the feature service behind the feature layer is multi-user, and so Karen could actually email me a copy of the drawing, and I could be working on it as well. And
Sure,
I can give it back to
absolutely.
her, or I can be a consultant, and I can work on it and give it back to her. And then when she's inside the firewall, she can push, synchronize, and do the same type of thing, as long as the plugin is loaded.
And by the way,
And it's free.
since we're having those discussions, one of the things to remember is that the GIS manager is in charge of who has edit of what. So you can publish these things as read-only if you want. So you can give them site content without saying, sure, edit all my drawings on my content. Or you can give them ability to edit. It's up to the GIS manager to make that decision on how they publish these layers.
Yeah, we've been kind of digging deeper into ArcGIS for AutoCAD. One of the other things that you can do is when you save a DWG file, any links to other maps you have are saved with the drawing. The coordinate system is saved in the drawing. So the container of the DWG has all that information, and you could create a template file that has all of these links already in it, and you could share that as a seed file that other people can fill up and give back to you, including that long transaction. That's just a thought.
It can be pretty rich when you start bringing in drawing templates.
I was just going to ask you the InfraWorks roadmap.
Yeah?
There's a software from Marcus called InfraWorks.
Say it again? Oh, go ahead.
InfraWorks.
He's
Yeah.
saying about the InfraWorks.
I'm just asking, the roadmap to integrate that, get the GIS data into
InfraWorks connector.
Right. I would say the InfraWorks connector, the question is what's the roadmap for the InfraWorks connector? That's an Autodesk technology that we are assisting them in, so that's the question best suited for them. But if you look at the types, like when Carrie talks about the different bridges and what are the gaps, they initially came out with reading feature services from ArcGIS Online. They've added to it portal and feature services as well as map services. So look for them to enrich that content for the types of things that they're interested in. We're approaching 11 o'clock, and if you want to get to the next session,
for the case of the recording, we have to
unmic.
unmic, but we'll be back in the back if anybody has questions.
Yeah, thanks for
Thank you
coming.
all for coming.